Hi everyone, I see people trickling in. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to get logged in and get settled, and then we'll get started. Thank you all for being here. Hi everyone, welcome to our Accords seminar series, Hot Topics in Mixed Methods and Qualitative Research. I'm going to go ahead and get us started so we have plenty of time for our speaker today. My name is Sarah Brewer. I'm the director of the education program at Accords, and I want to welcome you all today. As we get started, I'll start with what is Accords. We're supported by the University of Colorado School of Medicine and Children's Hospital Colorado. Accords is a unique one-stop shop environment for faculty to conduct pragmatic research and receive various services and support for grants and projects. Accords conducts pragmatic research in real-world settings to improve healthcare and outcomes by providing a multidisciplinary and collaborative research environment to catalyze innovative and impactful research. Strong methodological cores and programs led by national experts. And this particular series on mixed methods is partnered with our qualitative and mixed methods core here at Accords. We provide consultations and team building for grant proposals, mentorship training and support for junior faculty, and extensive educational offerings both locally and nationally, including seminar series like these. Let's look at our next slide. We've got some upcoming events for our Chords Education program in a couple weeks on March 20th. We have the next in our methods and challenges in conducting health equity research with Dr. Margarita Alegría. In April, as part of this hot topics and mixed methods and qualitative research series, we'll be hosting Rapali LeMay, focusing on longitudinal qualitative data, and that's on April 5th. And then on May 3rd, the final in our Hot Topics and Mixed Methods series, we'll have Dr. Jody Holtrup talking about complex mixed methods designs. And then finally, registration is open for CopperCon 2023. This is the Colorado Pragmatic Research and Health Conference. And the theme this year is around reassessing evidence. That is June 5th and 6th. And as we said, registration is open. All right, before I introduce our speaker for today and hand over the mic, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items about our seminars. So first, use the chat throughout the seminar, share questions, comments, chat with other attendees about the topic. We will have time for moderated question and answer at the end of the talk. So expect 10 to 15 minutes before the hour. We will shift into a little more interaction and Q&A. And second, please complete the evaluation at the end of the seminar today. That helps us make sure that we are meeting everyone's needs in terms of the best educational offerings that we can provide. All right. Today's seminar is part of our Hot Topics and Mixed Methods and Qualitative Research. It's the third of 5 in this series. And today we welcome Dr. Marty Otanez, and he will be talking about harm reduction, story sharing with people who use drugs, visual narratives designed to promote overdose prevention and destigmatize drug use. Dr. Otanez is a California-born medical anthropologist and filmmaker. His research and creative work focus on visualizing overdose prevention and harm reduction, psilocybin use among BIPOC community members in Colorado, and cannabis farming as an alternative livelihood for tobacco farmers in Malawi, Africa. He produced the web-based video program, Getting High on Anthropology, a story-based approach to cannabis research, education, and funding. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to some of his work in case others are interested. And I'm about to hand over the floor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Otanez today as harm reduction story sharing with people who use drugs. Welcome, Dr. Otanez.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah and Jordan. I appreciate your work, and I'm really excited to be here. It's always nice to be able to share my work and get input and feedback from others. And so let me start with the screen share for the presentation. And at any time, well, definitely if there's concerns or issues or things that weren't covered, feel free to email me after. I'm happy to talk more about some of these issues. So right now this screen is full, and I just want to briefly tell you a little more about myself so you understand the direction I'm coming from and where I'm going. So I'm trained as a medical anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, visual anthropologist. A lot of my approaches focus on ethnographic, qualitative strategies, including visual and arts-based approaches. And also I'm beginning to educate myself about decolonized approaches, which basically is an approach to kind of rethink white supremacy, racial injustice, structural racism, and also acknowledging our privilege as researchers and educators in higher ed. Most of my work in the visual arena has been around this model of digital storytelling, which I'll get into in this presentation. And the model I use is from this organization called Story Center, and they have an incredible amount of resources on that website. And I encourage people to check it out if they're interested in this methodology and process called digital storytelling. I also like to think of myself as a scholar activist, which basically means I look at my discipline of anthropology as a platform to promote social justice. I think we have a lot to do to promote thick solidarity with our individuals that we work with in communities. And that just means not cosmetic solidarity, but thick solidarity where we develop over time through relationships of trust, a shared understanding where we can create something beautiful together through research and creative work. And the picture there is from 1998 in UC Irvine, where I worked as a paid labor organizer during my dissertation writing phase. And I like to put that up because, again, my work tends to be politicized. I enjoy trying to apply my work and also to influence policymaking, and to not look at participants in projects as targets of policy, but actual individuals with agency that can influence policy. So I do want to do a little self-promotion. I have a current study right now I'm working on about BIPOC and low-income people in Colorado and their experiences and concerns with psilocybin. So if anyone's interested, reach out and feel free. You can visit the project website. There's an eligibility form as well as a consent form. And I'd be very grateful if anyone could just share this with contacts, loved ones, any others that have experience with psilocybin plant medicine. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Everything I'm going to talk about is going to be related to this project that I completed in 2021 called Naloxone Champions. And this QR code that will take you to the project website. And if you're not quick enough or you're not interested, you can just type in Naloxone Champions and then my last name and it should come up, or Anthropology or UC Denver. And most of this work was completed in about 5 to 6 weeks in the summer of 2021, and I had 76 participants, and it was funded by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And this wasn't research, it was an evaluation project. So just to clarify, when I did implement the project, I approached it as research. So I had all the individuals who participated sign consent and release forms. And the idea was the project was meant to increase knowledge of the importance of naloxone, which is an overdose prevention medication, and Narcan in reducing the number of opioid overdoses in Colorado. And this today in 2023, it's at epidemic proportions, and it's a huge issue. And I'm sure we don't have to reach too far in our own networks to see individuals who may have passed away due to an overdose. And the last line there, my brother, a couple of years ago, he overdosed. And, he's also, my relationship with him and my experiences in the family with him kind of are part of the foundation of this kind of work, like part of why I'm driven to do this and really educate myself and understand what can I do to try to address some of the problems and reduce stigma and promote overdose prevention. Okay, so here's the plan of action for my presentation. What I'm going to do is play 2 short videos. These are videos that were crafted during the project, and they're representative of this approach, using a video. And one is technically a digital story crafted by the individual herself, which is going to be Betsy's, called DUI. I'll run that second. The first one is by Andrew, not the Andrew who's my brother. There's a different Andrew in Colorado. And these are just meant to give you something tangible to hang on to understand what this stuff is all about. And there's lots of videos in this project, and these are just 2 that don't even cover everything. So if you do have a time and you want to watch some of these, or if you have very specific interests, I can guide you to a couple of them. And overall, the videos are heart-wrenching because this topic's really heavy. And we'll talk about that in terms of one of the problems with the model itself. After we talk about, or after I run the videos and we watch them, I'll briefly discuss them, and then I'm going to go into details into the methods. As I talk about the methods, I'll go into some of the challenges and concerns. And the idea is, maybe there's some best practices here or ways that you can kind of repurpose what I've done and do it better, and maybe apply it to some of your work. And I do want to also acknowledge that when I did my dissertation, I took a year off just to take a break, but I spent the whole year learning how to video edit. So having the luxury of spending a full year and learning the tricks and strategies and shortcuts of video editing, that has put me in a really good position to effectively not only do the research, but also craft videos in collaboration with study participants. And so let me stop sharing, and then I'm going to now get one of the videos ready. And this is going to be Andrew's video. And here we go.
I've been Narcaned probably about, I don't know, I'm guessing about 15, 16 times. I've had to be hospitalized for over a week because that was one time all my organs shut down on me. I've had to Narcan some of my own family members, my own friends. I've brought back 2 people, but one of them I brought him back like 3 times. I know how it feels to be Narcan. It's a good thing to have and to have there if you're a user, because it will save a life. And the very first time I helped bring somebody back, I was like completely like, what do I do, running around like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to figure things out. Luckily, a friend of mine was there that actually saved me. I was actually his first person that he brought back, and he showed me all kinds of different techniques and that he had learned over the time. And I luckily walked in the minute after he did a shot, and each time I'd be going to the sink to get a drink of water, and I'd turn around and his dog would be acting all crazy. I'd look and see that he was just turning purple, so I'd right away rush to him, started trying to move his body to get some blood to flow back through, and then I would just talk loudly to him so he could hear my voice, and I'd try to get a response. I'd start to get water and drop it on his head, so it would cause his body to force him to breathe, to stimulate his nervous system, to just try to keep him aware. And I'd tell him, like, if I feel like you need to be Narcan, I'm going to Narcan you, because I'm going to let you go like that. Sadly, I wasn't around when he did pass away, and I was there earlier that night. So I feel so bad for not being there, but I can't be there. A person can't be expected to be responsible for another person's life 24/7. It's going through the stresses that a person goes through, and you decide to use drugs to deal with it. If you didn't have the drug in your life when you were going through that stress, you could have possibly committed suicide without that drug. So I've opened a lot of people's eyes by telling them that, and they never looked at it that way. But the way I feel is like if I wasn't on drugs, I probably wouldn't be here, because I probably with suffering from depression, I probably would have took myself out. The way society has implanted this idea of the way life should be, the way we should be living, the stresses that don't even matter, because in the end, when you're lying there almost knowing you're gonna die or thinking you're gonna die, a lot of regrets cross the mind, and you're just like, now if I could redo it again, I wouldn't be stressing over some stupid bill or some materialistic thing, trying to impress somebody with some fancy car I could barely afford, or a house I could barely afford. I'd rather now that since I did get more than a second chance, I swear I have more lives than a cat, but I basically taking those lessons, that I'm trying to do what, when I die, I want to have no regrets, and spending time with my family, spending time with my daughter, teaching people awareness to open their eyes to all the stigmas that society puts out there on people, to help bring them down or keep them ignorant to what's really going on in the world.
In February 2019, I overdosed while driving and crashed my car in Denver, heading northbound on Monaco. The 3 months leading up to this point, I had been living in sober living and had done detox, a treatment program, gotten a job, a sponsor, and was adapting to living in Southeast Aurora in the sober living home when I was exited for a curfew violation. Prior to moving into the sober living house, I had a pretty traumatic relapse after having almost 3 years sober. During that relapse, I lost everything I had worked so hard to get back during those 3 years. So when I was exited from the sober living house, I had nowhere to go. I didn't have a plan B, which was why I was living out of my car when I started using again. I don't remember the crash. I remember waking up and not being able to see out of my eye. It was completely black. I could feel something in my neck, but when I tried to reach it, I couldn't because I was handcuffed to the gurney. Looking back, I wish the paramedic understood how scary it is to overdose, and that I'm a human being and somebody's daughter, friend, and sister. They sewed up my eye and they took me to Denver City Jail. When I got out, I saw that my paperwork said that the police officer noted my breath smelled like alcohol, and they wrote it up as a DUI. I never talked about the Narcan or the heroin, and neither did the judge, my PO, the police officer's notes. Nobody ever said anything about it. I pled guilty to a DUI and was sentenced to 2 years probation. Thank you to the person who saw me crash that day and called 911. Thank you to the paramedic who administered Narcan and saved my life. In 2021, I am a peer support specialist with Colorado Village Collaborative, a nonprofit organization that serves people experiencing homelessness through transformative housing communities like our safe outdoor spaces and tiny home villages. Through a trauma-informed and harm reduction lens, I am able to meet people where they're at. I have found my life purpose in peer work.
All right, let me go back to sharing the PowerPoint. So those are the two videos out of like 76. And the thing about Betsy's is hers was like what's considered a digital story in the sense that it was created by her. We worked on the script together. She picked the photos and then I gave her some training. So it was a one-on-one kind of workshop, which is not the ideal, but it just was the way it worked out with her. Whereas Andrew, the video was through a interview. And I'll go more into that, which is part of the discussion about semi-structured interviews and some of the things that work well and not so well in this process. And on this slide, I just quickly threw together a couple codes. And I've been for the last 6 months work with a research assistant coding everything. Because this project ended in September 2021 and I became chair of the department and got pulled away due to administrative things. So this project kind of got put to the back burner for now, but I've been slowly trying to code everything and pull everything together for write-up. So the project website, so here's some background to the project, then I'll go into some of the specifics with the methods. So the goal was from the outset to do 5 workshops. And so these are digital storytelling workshops that involve about 25 hours each, spread over a couple of days with 50 individuals. So that didn't work. After 3 months, there was no individuals. We had 1 or 2 that come forward and actually participate, but they never showed up for the second session. So what I did is I pivoted, and I'll talk about in a second. And then what I also did is I put together, prior to starting the project, a group of community advisors, and these individuals helped kind of think through objectives, think through different issues about the stories, and then also dissemination. And then at the time, it was an evaluation project. And since then, I now have it covered by COMER, by IRB, to be able to do research and analysis of the stories themselves and all the other data I collected. I was the project leader. I had 4 student assistants, and they were also video editors. And I provided 12 hours of digital story training, also training in interviewing and protocols. And I had contacts at 6 local syringe exchange programs in 6 different cities and towns in Colorado. So here's the towns, and then just briefly, here's a look at the different organizations that were like at the study sites. These were where the local contacts were that provided me with guidance and then access to their population. Okay, so the methods. This was a multi-method project and there was several methods. And I'm gonna just focus in this presentation on digital storytelling. Out of 76 participants and 76 stories, only about 10 or so were technically like actual digital stories following the method and process I'll tell you about. The others were mostly semi-structured interviews. And that was because recruitment was a problem. And many of us have problems with recruitment, and at each project I learned more and more how to do the recruitment effectively. And also did the traditional literature review. And I also did community video screenings. So in each of the towns, I'd have a set of videos, and then we rented a facility, screened the videos, invited audience members from the community as well as the storytellers themselves. And then we had a guided audience storyteller discussion. There were a few storytellers at each of the events, and then Q&A. And then at the community screenings, there were short surveys administered. And then also I did a web survey where I picked one video and people watched the video and then answered a couple questions about the efficacy of digital storytelling and other themes like destigmatization and overdose prevention. And on the left was just, this is an image of what I used in Westward to provide the public with information and to basically help with the recruitment. Okay, so this slide has a couple pictures from a workshop. The one and only like official workshop was in Grand Junction. And so there's 6 storytellers. So that's what the images are from. But what I want to do is just kind of explain what digital storytelling is. And this approach is everywhere. If you go to any corporation, they're integrating digital stories as a way to present to the world that they're humans and they care about people and they care about the environment. So the methodology, at least this notion of a digital story, it's like been appropriated and disseminated everywhere. And I think in the universe, there's like 30,000 or more digital stories out there. And if you have a topic or a subject, and then you type that into the web and type in digital story, you're bound to find an example or two because there's just so many of these. But here's a couple bullet points. So digital storytelling is a method and process for creating short videos that have first-person narration, personal images, text on screen, and background music. This process and method intersects with photo voice approaches, telenovelas, video diaries, and therapeutic videos. So individuals produce digital stories in a workshop format with co-facilitators. And there's typically maybe one facilitator for every 5 people. And I was lucky in Grand Junction. I think I had 4 facilitators, maybe 5 for 6 people. So it was very intimate and really, in a way, easy, despite all the other, technical things that come up when you run a workshop. So the idea is this process and method, it creates space for people's voices to be heard. So instead of Marty like telling the stories of individuals, it's the individuals themselves and their voices get to be heard. There also is sort of a greater sense of self. And there is some evidence, and I've written about this and hope to write about it in this project, that there's some transformation a person goes through when they share a story. And then also the story is in the hands of the storyteller, not necessarily the researcher or the project leader. And then the soul, like the epicenter of the digital storytelling process, is what's called the story circle. And this is critical. It's a space where people share their draft stories in an actual circle. And then there's a discussion and comments and suggestions on the story itself. And hopefully people leave the story circle with a better idea of how to further develop the story or alter it in whatever way they feel comfortable with. And this is where you find like this collective effervescence or solidarity developing because of the chemistry and dynamic that occurs when people just share these intimate moments in their life. Now, some of the concerns with this model, there's 2 major ones, and there's others too, but the major ones are, to what extent do facilitators play a role in the creation of the stories themselves? Like do they alter the meetings or change the language by providing direct input on the scripts themselves? So there is some concern where these are actually co-produced stories, not necessarily produced by the individuals themselves, but by co-facilitators in collaboration with storytellers. And then the process tends to produce sad stories. And so this raises all kinds of issues for me, like how do we integrate human parody or humor into some of the work that we do? I think we all might agree that there's a shortage or a lack of humor and parody in some of our work. And so I'm trying to also integrate when there's space to say, hey, if there's out of tragedy, is there something funny that we can bring up because people can relate to that? And obviously that takes work and a lot of work to also anchor it in some of the literature that exists. Okay, so one of the problems is, I got to rearrange my desktop so I can read this. Oops. Sorry, go back. Okay, so one of the problems is, you know, as public health people, we tend to want to, people who do this kind of work, especially like in the area of health communication, we want to force messages into the stories. And so one of the problems with this methodology is how to like acknowledge that and recognize that when you go into this work and you, in a genuine way, apply the digital storytelling process, you don't want to force public health messages. And so in a way, it's a crapshoot in terms of what you get. And I'm going to talk more about that. So in other words, if you want messages like, oh, reduce drug use or seek treatment for addiction, or alternatively, you know, carry Narcan or giving free syringes is not enabling drug use. So, excuse me, forcing messages into this process is problematic. And so there's sometimes tension when this method and process is applied in public health, because we have our objective to like increase health and reduce disparities. So, you know, the issue here's kind of bullet point 2. So prioritizing evidence-based health messaging in participants' narratives undermines the voices of storytellers and the authenticity of the stories themselves. And the goal is to try to find a balance between crafting health communication resources and honoring individuals' genuine lived experiences. And so one of the remedies is to provide space for participants to share experiences and not be used as public health props. So this is sort of my take on things. That image, I just like this image. I saw it recently on Twitter. It's kind of cool, that maybe goes well with this slide, and it's kind of colorful, and I like the heart with the saying itself. Okay, so another problem is, you know, when you have a group of people and you're trying to get them to create stories, you need a story prompt. So sometimes it's very difficult to find a story prompt that's really easy for people to get, but also broad enough to cover all people's different experiences. And so sometimes a story prompt could be too narrow, it could be too broad, and so this could lead to confusion. And what I have found works is to present and discuss the story prompt with storytellers and then alter it on an as needed basis. And then another way to do this is also to have more than one story prompt. And so you might have an overarching theme, you know, reduce stigma, promote overdose prevention, but and tell us about an overdose experience. But sometimes the chemistry of the group, there's other interests that relate, but might not be articulated in the way that we thought going into as facilitators. Another thing that works really well is to kind of do like a pilot run at the beginning of the workshop. You just quickly, after introductions, just say, hey, let's take out a piece of paper and pencil or a computer, and everyone write, we'll do a 5-minute writing exercise with a story prompt that kind of is broad and relates to the topic. And so sometimes those initial stories tend to be the ones that people go with, and they are, you know, they're not rehearsed and they're not influenced by, for example, when we run a workshop, if we show sample digital stories, let's say you show 4 or 5 in the first hour or two, sometimes the writing and the creation of the stories by the participants mimic the example videos you show people. And so if you just start with the story prompt without any of this other stuff, sometimes you get really good stories that come out of that, and sometimes not. Okay, the last problem related to digital storytelling, then I'll jump into semi-structured interviews with this project, is use of appropriate technology and supplies. Okay, so to do this stuff in the community, or at least in the mountains, you know, you have to have stable Wi-Fi. Some of this is like very basic, but I think we take it for granted. And sometimes you don't know until you're in the room. So having stable Wi-Fi, I always shoot for broadcast quality imagery and audio. So for audio, I use microphones that have the XLR connector. So that's different than like the little plug-in you see for regular headphones. And then also make sure you have laptops with chargers, extension cords. I typically use Video, which is a video editing program that I think for $300 I get 30 licenses for a year, and it's really easy to use. Excuse me. Alternatively, the professional program, which is a higher learning curve, is Adobe Premiere, which I use mostly for my professional work. And many times when the stories are created, I rebuild them later because I have more versatility with Adobe Premiere rather than Video. Audacity is a free audio program for audio editing. And also I need web-based folders for file sharing in the workshop. So rather than go from computer to computer with a drive, a little flash drive, having internet and then a web-based folder to share files is really a good thing to have. In a dream world, you want to use personal images and original files, not stuff ripped from the internet, because stuff ripped from the internet like Facebook or other social media platforms, they they change the photos and they're recompressed and they're lower quality. And then of course I push copyright free music, but I don't let people pick images that are copyrighted or copyright free from the internet. I like personal images or drawings. And then you have to have, of course, the usual water, coffee, and all the other things to make for, culturally appropriate meeting that's, 3-4 days long. And this is just now a screenshot of WeVideo. I just love editing. It's another way of writing, but you're writing with images. And here's just a real simple desktop. And then here, I pivoted from the digital storytelling approach to this approach of doing semi-structured interviews. And these are some of the little pamphlets that we would just hang outside at these centers. So this was during COVID in the summer. And we just, as people were leaving the facility with their free syringes and Narcan and other things, we would just ask them, hey, you interested to share your stories? And the goal was to have 3 interactions. First, the interview, then they come back and review the story, and then they come into the actual community event. And so I had about overall 60, 65 or so individuals that did this approach, the semi-structured interviews. So it was really a lot of work. I traveled over 4,000 miles in about 6-7 weeks or so. And I had 5 visits per site with the team, or some of the team members. And each of the conversations were about 30 minutes. We had lapel mics. And then here's a couple slides that just show images of doing the recordings and some of the themes. The themes are really intense. Some of the questions that were guiding the conversation: share a time when you or a person that you know overdosed and Narcan was used. Tell me about the syringe exchange program and why you're here today. I threw that question in because I have a lot of people saying how grateful they are to the syringe exchange program. So I want to piece together a short video just to show how these individuals appreciate the services that they get. Because I think a lot of these organizations don't get the kudos that they need, and they're overworked and underpaid. So it was really important that I did that and added that question for sort of building relationships with contacts. Okay, I'm going to pass through this. Okay, so problems. Now, these are problems with the semi-structured approach to collecting stories with individuals who use drugs or who experienced or participate in some way with an overdose. How to avoid trauma porn. Okay, so this is a serious issue of like not exoticizing poverty and hardship. So people who use drugs may present themselves as experiencing trauma or other mental health challenges. So we want to avoid exoticization. So typically, if there's a sense that this is happening, meaning the story we're getting is just intense, or the person's experience in the interview is like it's veering into some difficult terrain, we kind of stop the interviews, check in with the participant. And then we always have health workers nearby, and we check with them. We can also offer resources. This didn't happen a lot, but the one time it did happen, it just created some tension among members of the advisory committee members, or the advisory committee, as we work through one of the stories called The Devil Followed Me out of Pueblo. One member said we shouldn't show this. The other one who works at the facility said we need to show this because this is the real life experience of our constituents. And so we went back and forth, and I eventually deferred to the local person who I trusted and felt that people need to see these kinds of stories. Another thing is, how do you destigmatize without re-stigmatizing? So sometimes individuals, when they tell stories, they stigmatize themselves. They may call themselves junkies or do something kind of silly because they're using drugs. So one person told us about an incident where she was high and using naloxone to give an injection to save an overdose, but she forgot to take the cap off. And so she was like trying to give the injection. And so how do we deal with that and talk through it and not like re-stigmatize people? So this idea of striking a balance between, discriminatory self-representations and then counter storytelling themes. So again, consulting with advisory members is good. And then also making sure we go back to the individuals and show them the videos and see how they feel about how they're represented. Overall, out of about 76 participants, about 20 actually met us for the second time to look at their videos, because this was a population really difficult to get a hold of with their phone or email. And so that part of the project kind of didn't work out as well as I wanted it to. Lastly, there's ethics. Ideally, we don't want to harm people. Participants shouldn't experience hardship or be re-traumatized or lose employment. And so it's really being in touch and in communication with our local contacts, and then also following all the best practices of IRB. I did administer consent and recording release forms. These are necessary, but I think they're insufficient. And so I think there's something called situational ethics, where depending on the moment, where the circumstances and the input you get from local people, making this best decisions based on kind of consensus and really thinking carefully about the ramifications. Now, there's a high likelihood that several participants were active users during interviews. They weren't actually shooting up or anything like that, but it was kind of understood because of just the population that they were likely on drugs. And this is anecdotal, but from what I heard from a professor I work with, a mentor, he said, yes, they're vulnerable, but it's likely easier for them to actually converse, because if they were in need of drugs and not able to get them, they're a little bit more antsy and more difficult to talk with. So in a way, it's like this thing to work through, and it was just part of the reality of this kind of project. Obviously, communication and guidance from on-site health workers, dealing with any ethical issues or issues of representation. And then the last main thing about this problem is the videos that I produced with my team members, with input from the advisors on this committee. We used a lot of stock imagery, like stock video footage, because to make a digital story, the workshop setting, people collect images, personal images, but most of the individuals who were people who use drugs, they sometimes only have bags that they carry and that's it, or they're unhoused. And so they don't have a lot of personal photos. So the stock imagery makes some of the videos look a little weird, because you have this story and then this footage that sometimes doesn't make sense. So that was the issue I had to work through. And then I believe this is the last slide, ongoing work. So first on the right side are two images. So these images are one, the top is Denver at a bar. I think it's called the Fainting Goat. And then the one at the bottom is out of Grand Junction. And these are representative images of community screenings, where we had digital storytellers come with members of the community, watch the videos, and then talk about them. So I just wanted to show those, because that was like that human interaction and the sharing. It was just really magical, and it sort of drives me just having that kind of conversation with people. So what's happening now? The ongoing work that I'm doing, writing up the material. There's multiple different kinds of publications I'm getting out of this, or I'm hoping to get out, using interpretive analysis. I'm in the process of trying to get a book-length graphic novel that would probably divide it into maybe 6 different key themes. And the goal is to identify people who use drugs and work with them and pay them appropriately to actually draw and produce the artwork for the graphic novel. So I'm trying to ensure I approach it ethically and people are compensated fairly. So I'm working through that, but the goal is to do a full-length graphic novel. I also can easily, and I'm hoping to produce a short methods video. This has been really intense, like some of the skills that you need to talk with people who are going through remembering overdoses, or using Narcan, or having intense relationships with the first responders. It's pretty heavy stuff. And so I've been really interested by all the people I've met for myself to finish some peer support training. And every year I look into it. It's just every year, it's like 7 days a week and 4 hours a day. So I'm trying to find the appropriate peer support training for myself to be better in the trenches. Lastly, some ongoing work that I'm doing is to build support to end the war on drugs, which has proven that it's failed and it's hurting mostly people of color in our communities, and also to stop the criminalization of people who use drugs, promote safe drug supplies, and of course, what's really timely right now is to promote the creation of overdose prevention sites. And there's actually a state bill right now, HB 23-1202, that deals with this specific issue of overdose prevention sites. And there's a website there, the Colorado Drug Policy Coalition.org, and you can get more information. So that is it for me. Oh, of course, can't forget the acknowledgements. I did not do this alone. I had a lot of people help me out. And these are just a couple of the main organizations, advisory committee members, and of course the funds from CDPHE. And again, I've learned a lot and I'm still learning about this approach and this scholarly work that hopefully over time will have a big impact. And that's it for me. And again, I really appreciate your willingness to listen, and I hope there could be some nice discussion now.
Thank you so much for sharing these really powerful stories. I'm watching the chat and also thinking more broadly about the work you've shared. Can you maybe take us a step back to the beginning of your process and share a little about sort of the basic structure, the approach you take to doing this digital storytelling workshops and what those look like for somebody who might be interested in doing those?
So first of all, it's really time consuming to develop the necessary like contacts and collaborators. So it's like finding collaborators you can trust that are willing to participate and go on this ride. And then also having the appropriate tech skills. Half of the battle is just dealing with technological problems. You know, for example, a storyteller may have this incredible photo that's on their phone that's appropriate to the project and makes sense for the story, but because the phone is not compatible for whatever reason, like we can spend an hour or two just getting one photo off the phone. So I think to start with, those are a few things. And then also learning about the story center approach to digital storytelling. They have workshops that they do regularly to train people on how to administer workshops. And so they also have a cookbook. If you go online, I think chapter 2 of the digital storytelling cookbook has some great things to think about in terms of how to administer and think through the story creation process.
Yeah. So when you're in a workshop and you've got your, I'm thinking of your ideal version with 10 participants per workshop. What are sort of the main phases of that process you go through with participants?
So you're talking about in the actual workshop, the steps that you go through.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing is we try to ensure that we're conscious of everyone's needs. And so I really try not to do workshops in an academic setting because the institutions we work in are very sterile. So I try to find venues that are comfortable and more like living room kind of like. So that's the first thing. And then we do introductions. So people share a bit about themselves, why they're there, things that are on our minds, how we're feeling. And then we go into explaining, you know, what we're going to do, like for the digital storytelling process itself, like what's the schedule of the training. And then we do a couple, like, let's watch a couple digital stories. And the main thing there is just how to systematically watch a video. Like here in this webinar, people watch the video and I tell people there's 5 things to look out for. And this is discussed in the workshop. The story itself. How does it make you feel? Does it pull any heartstrings? Then there's imagery, then there's audio, then there's text on screen, and then there's also music. And so how to read watching the video and thinking through the different elements. Then we go into introducing the story prompt, and then that's usually the heaviest part of the workshop is people taking the time to craft the story that they're comfortable with. And so we may spend up to 6 to 8 hours pinning down a script that's about 400 words, which equals about 3 minutes. And then we audio record it. And then many of us, the biggest trauma, and I'm using that word lightly, the biggest trauma is people hearing their own voices on a recording. So we have to work through that. And so sometimes we do some audio exercises to make it not a big deal and for people to not be embarrassed, because it's always embarrassing in a big room to hear your voice. So then we have tutorials about video editing, assembling the video, adding transitions, exporting, and then we have a chance to like celebrate and we run the videos. And then usually people have something to say about their video or about the process. And then we wrap up usually with a survey or an evaluation. And then it never fails because of, again, the human contact and the solidarity that comes from this process, that whenever I do this, it always leads to another project because people just love sharing stories and get to know each other. And so I think that's at the heart of this kind of process, and the challenge is how to capture that. And you can have pre and post interviews, and then also evaluations. And then you can also, some people have done this, I've done it, it's really tricky, but you can record the whole workshop, which for some people could be a problem because if people are oversharing, but that's another way to think about how to go into this kind of process.
Amazing. We've got some questions about sort of the impacts of this work. So do you mind talking a little bit both about the potential impact of digital storytelling for raising awareness, but also for health outcomes for multiple levels, whether that's individual or a whole community?
Yeah, so the impact is a bit nebulous. In one project, not this one, I did say to what extent watching a video about hepatitis, for example, is that going to change your behavior? And so that's like one approach to directly link digital stories to health outcomes. I think with this, some of the questions I asked in the surveys, like after watching this video, are you interested to get more resources about Narcan? Or after watching this video, would you agree that this process helps to undermine stigma against drug users? So I think there's ways to, in a more sophisticated way, kind of figure out how to directly link a story to a health outcome, but I think it's very dependent on what's the issue you're looking at. And so I think in general, the strength of this process is just creating relationships of trust with community members, and then potentially using that as a foundation to do some additional studies to augment the digital storytelling approach.
Great. We have a question about IRB things, and you started to touch on sort of the ethics of the work and some of the problems that can come up. But can you talk about some of the IRB implications of the actual digital storytelling process? So somebody brought up public Wi-Fi, using free platforms, things like that. Are there considerations or strategies you've taken to help protect your participants?
Yeah, great question. And number one, if anyone's interested in this stuff, I'm happy to share all my IRB material, because when I started, I basically created a really good model where I can instantly submit stuff and get it approved. So here's the issue. People are going to sign consent forms that basically say they understand that this is not private. And so they also could, for example, conceal their face if they want, or we can disguise their voice. And IRB, in general, the principle is like to make people anonymous. Okay, but in this kind of approach, people are going to be, if they're comfortable putting themselves out there, whether through audio or both imagery and audio. So the consent forms and the protocols go through systematically, how to approach it and emphasize to people that they have multiple opportunities to opt out, but also to recognize that if they agree that their video goes on the internet after the project, that anyone can rip their video. And that if they come to us later to request to take the video down, we can do that, but that doesn't mean someone else hasn't ripped it. And so for the other things, such as in a workshop using a Wi-Fi to share files, all we're sharing are photographs from individuals. And so maybe I haven't thought too much in a sophisticated way, but with in an actual setting, we're in a room and sharing files, people know that stuff's going to be public in basically how it's shared to the Wi-Fi. And so and many people, very rarely, the ones I showed you, digital stories very rarely actually show people themselves. It's just photographs of things that are symbolic or artwork that they've created. But these are great things to think about, to be conscious of the potential of either narratives like scripts or personal imagery getting taken through the Wi-Fi, although we've never had that problem, and I'm sure it's something I need to address in a more sophisticated way.
Yeah. We have one more question. Thinking about the use of theory or frameworks for your digital storytelling work, can you talk about how you've used theory or frameworks to guide your work, or how necessary that is when you're doing digital storytelling based work?
Great. Yeah, excellent question. So the approach I take is a more applied approach, and thinking through of, how to present this in a way and make the results useful for the individuals who participate in the project. So it's in general a applied approach. The analytical stuff I use to kind of dissect and understand the stories, there's ethnographic content analysis, which is something that I use, which is basically looking at the imagery and the audio and what's literally there, what's literally said, and then what's the subtext behind it. And so ethnographic content analysis kind of provides a strategy for unpacking everything, trying to make sense of it, and then applying interpretive analysis, through explanation, trying to make statements and never generalizations, but just trying to give people a sense through vignettes and case studies. What are some of the main findings? So more and more theorizing digital storytelling, I think, is becoming popular. But for me, I've been mostly trying to create models where people can do this in the community without facilitators like me, and we can be leverage points to get them money to do the stories that they want to tell for their own community building.
That's great. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your work and this important approach to sharing stories in the community. I believe we are ready to close out for today. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, all of our attendees, and we look forward to having you join us for the remainder of our series in April and in May.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate everything, and I really enjoyed this.
And you're getting lots of thanks in the chat as well as people are logging off.
Excellent. And you have a great day.
Thank you, you too.